I'm going to start off talking about some definitions. Nutrient management planning, I'll start off with. Nutrient management planning is planning to use all of the nutrient resources on a farm, like manure, and all the purchased nutrients, like fertilizer, in a way that they go to the crops and they don't end up in groundwater or surface water. And in Wisconsin, our particular concerns are phosphorus excess in surface water and nitrates in groundwater. And the software I work on, SnapPlus, supports nutrient management planning in Wisconsin following the 590 standard. And I'm going to get a bunch of acronyms out of the way right off the bat, because I'm going to use them while I'm talking, and you're going to need to know what they are. The 590 standard is the Natural Resource Conservation Services guidelines for nutrient management planning on farms. And every state has a version of this 590 standard. And in Wisconsin, even though the guideline is maintained by the NRCS, when it's developed with a group that always has included the university and the state agencies that are involved with agriculture and resources, and those are the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, and our agricultural department, which is also called the Department of Ag, Trade, and Consumer Protection, and that's DATCAP. So you'll hear me say that. And it also is included representatives from the counties, land conservation departments that help with nutrient management planning, and it's also included members of the agricultural community and sometimes members of the environmental groups. And in Wisconsin, what that means to use the 590 standard, what it entails at first is you have soil tests for all of the fields on a farm. And you use those soil tests and the cropping plan to develop the plan for the nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium needs for each field. And you also take note of all of the restricted areas on a farm. And those are areas which have been noted as being, because of their proximity to water, surface water, they're high risk of soil loss because of some other kind of feature like slope. They're at high risk of surface runoff contaminating surface water. And there's also areas that have been identified as being particularly prone to leaching losses. And we take account of all of those. And once we understand the needs and restrictions for all of the fields, we look at the manure nutrients on the field and the total amount of manure on the farm, and also the nitrogen that's going to be available from the legume crops that were grown in prior years. And we make a plan to distribute all of that manure to meet the crop needs. And if there's any nutrient need left over after you've distributed all of that manure in a good planned fashion, then you're going to plan to make up the rest of the needs with fertilizer. So nutrient management planning really got off the ground in the 1990s, and that's when the first nutrient management standards were developed. And originally, they really just focused on annual budgets and particularly on nitrogen. And it was particularly on nitrogen in Wisconsin because we had problems with nitrates in groundwater. And this is the cover sheet for the first spreadsheet program for nutrient management planning called SNAP. Now you know where SnapPlus comes from. SNAP was the Soil Nutrient Management Application Program. And those standards also required that you meet soil loss guidelines to be able to apply nutrients to your fields, and that you avoid high runoff risk areas and high runoff risk times. But you needed to get the soil loss, you needed to go to somebody at the county level, somebody who could help you calculate soil loss. And you had to find the maps to figure out whether you were in a high risk area. In the early 2000s, there was this push on both at the national level and within Wisconsin to manage phosphorus better, and to include that in our nutrient management planning. And at the national level, there was a requirement that every state develop some kind of a method to address the over application of phosphorus that came with livestock manures. In areas with a lot of manure, there was a lot of phosphorus building up on the landscape and leading to phosphorus water quality problems. And in Wisconsin, we had and still have a number of water quality impairments across the state caused by excess phosphorus. So the group that was working within Wisconsin that was working on this new nutrient management planning standard realized that they needed to do something, and they picked two kinds of strategies for phosphorus management. One of them was to, when the soil test values for phosphorus get above a certain level, you start to limit manure phosphorus applications so that they won't build up, and you'll stop the buildup at some point. And the other strategy that they picked was a phosphorus index, and there's a number of states that are developing phosphorus indexes at that time. And the purpose really was to be a runoff phosphorus loss risk assessment for fields, so that you could identify a field if you needed to apply more manure phosphorus than the crop needs. Then you could find places where it was less likely to end up contaminating surface water through runoff. And this group realized that there's a little bit of a shift here in concept, because these phosphorus strategies required that you plan for the whole crop rotation instead of just 1 year. And in Wisconsin, there's a lot of long rotations, especially for dairy farms. And for example, that would be 2 or 3 years of a row crop like corn, and then 3 or 4 years of alfalfa. That's pretty common. And the reason why you need to look at the whole rotation when you're looking at your phosphorus management is you need to know how you're building phosphorus or drawing down phosphorus over the whole time you're managing, because all of these crops need different amounts of phosphorus, and some farms will never put phosphorus on their alfalfa, but they'll put a lot of, or they will never put manure on their alfalfa, and they'll put a lot of manure down on their corn. And so you really need to look at the whole plan to determine what's happening with the buildup of phosphorus. And you also, to look at phosphorus loss risk, really depends on runoff and erosion risk too from the field. And you can't understand what those are unless you understand the management across the rotation and the soil loss across the rotation. So this group, which included Bill Pearson and Kevin Erb and Les Durrell and Larry Bundy, they wrote a grant to have software that included this the soil loss equations, as well as the nutrient accounting and the phosphorus loss equations, because they determined that there weren't enough field staff in the counties to help all the people who needed nutrient management plans figure out their soil loss, for instance. So eventually they got support for this software from NRCS and DATCAP. And that's about when I came in. And after several years of work, we managed to release the SnapPlus. And one of the really fun things about preparing for this talk is you got to go back and look at old logos and old slides. And see, this is a conceptual diagram from the very beginning, and it still fits. The idea was that we would have all of these models with the same data input that from the planner. So you need input on the location, the soil, the slope and slope length, soil test values, what kind of crops you're growing and what kind of yields, the tillage and manure and fertilizer applications. All of these models use that information and share the information, and then you output your information about how much manure and fertilizer you need to apply to each field, and your soil loss across the rotation, and your phosphorus losses and phosphorus and potassium balances. Russell 2 is the soil loss equation, the latest version of the soil loss equation in software. And it was just coming out right as we were starting to build this software. And so that is the soil loss calculator we put in. And that was frankly the hardest thing to do. Well, it uses Russell 2 software itself, and it's just incorporated into our software package and shares information. But making those connections was really hard and took way much longer than our programmer expected, and required a lot of help from Russell 2 people. Right now, I want to switch and talk a little bit more in detail about our p-index calculator, because that will come up more later. As I said before, there were a number of states who were developing phosphorus indexes, and there was a lot of discussion at that time about whether phosphorus indexes should be qualitative or quantitative, and how much detail they should have. And in Wisconsin, we took a modeling approach. And in doing that, I want to say that we followed the lead of Minnesota and also Iowa, and we learned a lot from Minnesota in that case. And I saw that Ann Lewandowski was on this, so hi, Ann. So what our p-index does is it estimates delivery from the field and to the nearest surface water for phosphorus on an annual basis. And it does that by looking at this particulate sediment-bound phosphorus, and makes an estimate of the dissolved P that's coming from the soil and dissolved P that's coming from manure and fertilizer applications. And then it also makes an estimate of how much of that that's coming from the field can actually be delivered to surface water, making some assumptions about the nature of the channel that's between the field and the surface water. And so you get an annual phosphorus delivery is the P index. And one of the reasons why other states chose not to do some kind of modeling phosphorus index was because they said it was too complicated. And we found that the inputs to our phosphorus index were exactly the same inputs that you needed for the qualitative phosphorus index. And once we had made the decision to have this very complicated software that linked with Russell 2, it didn't really matter in the back end how complicated our equations were because the user wouldn't see them. It mattered if we had to increase any data input. So the rule was don't add data inputs. So, and one of the big reasons why we picked, the two big reasons why we really pursued this modeling approach was one, that we thought it could be tested, and the other was because it would allow us to make more precise and comparisons of phosphorus loss under different management practices on specific fields. And both of those things have proven to be true. We were very fortuitous in that at the time we were developing this phosphorus index, there was many programs in Wisconsin that were sprang up to monitor phosphorus and sediment losses from cropped fields with manure and without manure and all different kinds of tillages year round. So we were able to compare our model inputs, our model outputs with these year-round loads, these annual loads of phosphorus from cropped fields. And the results were very good. And given, if we assume that the soil loss estimates that we're getting from Russell 2 and our runoff estimates are good, then our phosphorus index is likely to be doing a pretty good job of estimating the effects of management. And we are also been able to make these comparisons, really specific comparisons. For example, here, this is a field in a corn silage and alfalfa rotation with specific soil and soil tests. And it gets manure every year. And we're able to look at both an estimated quantity and type of phosphorus with the management change. For here, if this field is chisel plowed in the fall, then the particulate P losses are going to be much greater than if it's not plowed, and if the manure is not incorporated, the losses of dissolved P from the manure are going to be greater. And if you have the same field and it's continuously no-till, the losses in dissolved P are going to be much greater if you apply the manure in the winter than if you apply it in the fall. So this allows people to make tweaks on what they do to manage their phosphorus. So when we started in our first release in 2005, it was, the team was Larry Bundy and an agronomist to help us, one programmer and myself. And we had an idea that, there'd be a little bit more work, and we'd fix some bugs as they came in, and then in a year or two, it'd go down to just a little bit of software developer time to keep it going. And now, several logos and mini releases, and almost 2 decades later, there are 4 full-time software developers working on the program, and myself. And there's a large infrastructure throughout Wisconsin now to train planners and to train farmers and to keep the nutrient management planning system with SnapPlus going. And at this point, almost all of nutrient management plans in the state are done with SnapPlus. So why did we have to, why couldn't we just be done? It turned out that one of the first things that we needed to do to add to the software, once we'd gotten all those models put together, is add a bunch of checks to help people know when they'd made a mistake. So for instance, if they were applying at too high a rate in an area that had a particular rate restriction in the fall because of its nitrogen leaching potential, we needed to tell them that they were applying too much nitrogen in the fall. So a lot of our software time over these years has been on adding checks to help farmers and planners know where they're not within the guidelines, and to point them to where they should be within the guidelines. And these checks have gotten more necessary and more complicated as expectations have gotten grown for doing good nutrient management planning. And another thing that's happened is we need to make updates of the information behind the software. The soil survey is updated every year. We don't update every year. We try to update every other year. We tried to update every year, but it's ended up being about every other year for some reasons or other. The fertility recommendations in Wisconsin have changed twice. They've been totally updated, and in one of those updates, they also updated how manure, nitrogen, and phosphorus and potassium credits are distributed. So that it made a big change in how we needed to program. Russell 2 has been updated several times, and we got a new standard in 2015. We've also added over the years a number of features that our users have requested, and our users, the main group are certified crop advisors and agronomists that who do nutrient management planning, but they also have farmers and land conservation departments, and a wide group of people. And there's been first off, there was many requests for tools to speed data entry. If you're having to plan for a 60 field farm, and your farm, most of your fields have the same crop rotation, and all of your corn gets, you would like to use a standard rate of fertilizer across all your corn. You need to be able to have a way to put multi-field inputs in all at once. And so we've developed a lot of those. They're also requests for different reports and displays that would help people understand and implement their nutrient management plan better. And then there's been a lot of requests for changes and updates to content. We have, to make it all work, we needed to put all the crops and representative tillage systems that people would use in drop downs and that link to parts of our database. And particularly the tillage systems, we wanted them to be representative. So because we're never going to match any farm's tillage system exactly. And most of the time our representative tillage systems work, but several times we've gotten enough feedback from people that they don't feel represented by our representative tillage systems, and it's become an impediment to them trusting their nutrient management plan. And whenever something becomes an impediment to planning, we try to fix that. And one of the things we added was vertical tillage systems as a choice, and there's been some other tillage systems we added as a choice, and we've also added cover crops, a lot of crop and cover crop combinations because of the push within Wisconsin, particularly to use cover crops and to keep overwinter cover. And one of the fun things that's changed is the map technology. When we started, Web Soil Survey was just up. So before that, people were going to look for paper maps. And because our standard has so many area-based restrictions, and many of those restrictions are based on soil type and identifying what kind of soils are really prone to leaching. It was really hard to pick all that data off a soil map and really understand what you're looking at. So together with DATCAP and NRCS, we early on put together a package of PDF maps that people could download that for the whole state. You could download them by section, and they were editable PDFs, so you could draw field boundaries on them, and they showed all these restriction areas that were required for planning. But you still had to take that map and enter the data from that map for your field into the program. In 2015, we got a GIS system, which has been great. And that means that our software is still a desktop program, but we're able to send information up about the fields up to the maps and draw the map, the field boundaries, or import field boundaries into the maps, and then download all the restriction information back to the program. So, and because of this two-way communication, we can make maps of soil test values, and it just makes planning much more fun to me, and also easier. And one really fun thing we have just done is introduced a mobile app that puts the manure prohibition maps on a mobile device for any farm that you can go use in the field, and it tracks manure applications in the field and tells you when you have gone into an area you shouldn't have gone into, and helps you avoid it. And I think we will probably be doing more of this mobile in the mobile information in the field. That picture looks kind of funny because I was using this app. Well, I was testing this app in my neighborhood, and I was walking along spreading manure in my neighborhood. So this slide is just to indicate that planning for CAFO, which is concentrated animal feeding operations, planning for CAFOs has been an important part of our software, and it has required a lot of support. The number of CAFOs in Wisconsin hasn't really increased that much since we started. There was just under 300 then, and now there's 335, but the size of them has increased, and the number of acres that they cover, each one covers. And a nutrient management plan is required for these large farms to operate. And planning to distribute the manure from 4,000 cows wisely over 450 acres is extremely difficult with software, and it's impossible without it. So helping guide these large operations so they do good plans has been a really important part of what we've done. I said earlier that in the 2000s was really, there was a more focus on phosphorus. In the 2010s and up to now, there's an increasing refocus on nitrogen in groundwater and doing something to manage agricultural nitrogen better. And that's because we have still have these nitrate problems in groundwater, particularly in some of the heavy agriculture areas of the state. And another main focus that has come up is looking at areas that are particularly vulnerable to groundwater contamination, and assigning or making new management guidelines for those areas. And the one that has been fully developed in Wisconsin is guidelines for the eastern part of the state where there's shallow, where there's very shallow bedrock, and it's Silurian bedrock that's fractured, and it's very common for what's applied to the surface to show up in the groundwater within a matter of days. And these new rules have required adding new maps which are actually still under development to our mapping system that show depth to Silurian bedrock, and within each of those depth categories, there's a set of rules for whether you can apply manure at all. And if you do apply manure, do you have to incorporate it? Do you have to do a tillage before you incorporate it? So we've had to make both the maps and then incorporate those guidelines and checks within the software. And there's going to be more of that coming as the focus moves to other parts of the state which have karst and have similar problems with groundwater contamination. So over this time, nutrient management planning has really grown. When we started, less than 10% of the cropland had an official nutrient management plan, and now it's 35% or more. This is according to DACAP. Every year, people who are doing nutrient management planning for a particular program or reason, that's I'll get to all of the reasons in a minute. But if you're doing nutrient management planning for some kind of official reason, you turn in some kind of documentation to your county land conservation department, and then the counties all turn in some kind of statistics to DATCAP. So DATCAP keeps these annual statistics about how many plans there are and who writes them. And one of the cool things to me is that 23% of the plans in the 2021, which is the last set of statistics I have, were written by the farmers themselves, which is great because that is likely to mean they'll be implemented, as opposed to being done by a crop consultant. And there's a program in Wisconsin that's run through the counties that allows farmers to write their own plan if they're in a training program that's overseen by somebody who is a certified planner. And here, I was going to talk about who's doing the plans and why. The big drivers for planning and the growth of planning, one of them has been that having a nutrient management plan is part of a package of conservation practices that are required for getting agricultural land tax credits under certain circumstances, and that came into effect about 2016. And that group of farms accounted for about 50% of the plans in 2021. Another big driver for plans is counties that have ordinances that say if you've got manure storage or you're in a certain area, you have to do a plan, and that accounts for about 22% of the acres in plans. And then the other big driver is the CAFOs. They're not a very big percentage of the farms, but they're a big percentage of the acres covered by plans. So at the same time, we've had this expanded and extensive use of SnapPlus for nutrient management planning, which it's designed for. There's been growth of use of the program in another area, and that's as a tool for water quality programs. One of it, I think it's best used in this case is as an inventory tool for ranking phosphorus loss risks from fields so that you can address the most important areas in a watershed. And you can identify practices that might help in these high risk areas. And we had a project that's ran for 10 years. It was a paired watershed project where we looked at one watershed and used the phosphorus index to identify problem areas and to identify possible changes and land use changes on fields, and together with some changes, some stream bank changes were applied across the whole watershed, and it worked. There was a 50% phosphorus reduction in vent runoff from streams. And now in Wisconsin, there are a number of people and groups working on water quality projects who, when say SnapPlus, they really mean the P index, and they're not thinking about nutrient management planning at all. But they're thinking about, here is this program that is loaded up with Wisconsin soils, and it's got Wisconsin agricultural practices in it, and people are already used to putting information in it, and farmers have it for all of their fields. And it's being used, or has been used, for pay for performance kinds of programs, phosphorus trading, and general phosphorus loss reduction modeling for in-field practices. And in this case, the Department of Natural Resources has listed SnapPlus and helps people use SnapPlus as one of the methods that they to use for modeling for adaptive management projects, and also for water quality trading. And now, right now, we are working on version 3, which is going to be totally on the web. We're looking forward to that. This is going to allow us to share data more easily between people, and give farmers the ability to allow other people to review their data without changing it. It's going to solve a lot of problems regarding data sharing, and it's also going to help us fix things quickly, which we couldn't do when we had a desktop program that was, you had to reinstall it every time you fixed a bug. That does not go over well with people who are using the program. If you have to keep reinstalling. One of our big purposes in this revision is to try to identify all of the planning processes that are confusing to people, or have where they likely make errors. So it's kind of been fun to really think back over the years and identify all the pain points and try to figure out how to fix them. And we're expecting, and I don't know when it's going to happen, that we will soon, not soon, because sometime within the next decade, we will be adding some kind of field scale nitrogen loss risk assessment. I don't know when it's going to happen, because there's not one that's available yet. There's several under development, or there's several groups developing things that might be useful for nutrient management planning, but they're not there yet. And we also know that we're going to probably be tightening up some things, because there's going to be an update to the standard in 2025. And one other kind of future vision I wanted to talk about is, I think that with the technology that's available now, there's a really good opportunity to link the field scale information that we've got in SnapPlus with the landscape scale drainage patterns and information that it's now pretty easy it's relatively easy to develop with the good LiDAR that we have now. And this is an example of Dane County's website where they've marked out all the drainage patterns, and they've also indicated all the areas of recharge and internally drained areas. And they're an example of a county that's really pushing this concept and hopefully we will be able to take some of these maps and link them into our Snap Maps to help people put their fields and their field losses in context of the watershed, and that will help identify risks from not just from what's in the field, but that it will actually get to surface water. And I'd like to close with acknowledging all the software developers who worked with me over the years, getting academic software development pay instead of private industry pay, and all of the agencies that have supported us. And now I can go for questions.
Great, thanks, Laura. Any questions in the room? And then on Zoom, you can either type them in or unmute and ask that way.
I've got a question. Are you going to be using the GIS elevation maps for slope calculations, automatic slope calculations, or are you still going to just require interpretation from maps and input for that? That's the first question.
Okay, the question is are we going to use LiDAR for soil loss calculations, or are we going to use the new DEMs to work with slope and slope length for soil loss calculations? That's the question?
Yes.
Okay, not immediately. That is would be a wonderful thing down the road, but for now, one of the things that's really a time sink is the soil loss calculations, and we are actually hoping to be able to do them in real time. And in the new version, in our current desktop version, they take so long that you have to do everything else and then push a button to get them calculated. And so we've just been going along with the meeting the NRCS standards and practices of picking the dominant critical soil and doing one slope with that. And I would think that if we use the DEMs, we would need to do multiple slopes, I think, and it would be a larger programming problem than we can deal with right now, or maybe is needed right now.
I do have another question. How are you paying those developers? Our problem here in Minnesota, when we did develop a database based program for nutrient management planning, but we couldn't pay for the upkeep over years. Just had to go and get a grant for this change and a grant for that change. How are you doing this on a continuous basis?
It's kind of amazing. And I think it's because of the long-term partnership between the agencies in Wisconsin, and their focus on nutrient management, that they have all started to chip in. DATCP started first, and built in annual allotments for the software development, and then DNR and NRCS have both they're still annual, mostly they're still annual grants, but they just know they're gonna make them. And it's become one of their regular program expenses. And they've all become so dependent on the software for running their programs that they can't not make those allotments.
I think that kind of answers Melissa's question that she asked in the chat about how this is all funded. They just pay more attention to manure in Wisconsin, Melissa.
Yeah, there is, I will say, there was, for many years, there was this one very strong, opinionated person at DACAP who was in charge of nutrient management planning programs. And she actually was one of the real pushers of getting it into software in the first place. And she was one of the real pushers of, if we were gonna make software, you had to put Russell 2 into it. And then when it started, she was saying, nagging some of the NRCS to remember that they wanted to contribute. And so part of that was just having some real strong personalities even that were pushing the agencies to all work together.
Yeah, I have another question kind of about personalities or how these agencies are working together. That tax credit law that has essentially given SnapPlus a lot of business kind of jumped out at me. And I was curious, when something like that comes up, are you getting a call beforehand that's like, Laura, we're thinking about requiring SnapPlus for this piece of legislation? Or are they going to DATCAP? And is DATCAP checking in with you about whether you think that's a good idea? Or do you just hear about it after there's a law and realize that you're going to have a lot more users?
That's an interesting question. What that one requires, no, it doesn't require SnapPlus, it requires nutrient management planning.
Mm-hmm.
And so that, no, people don't ask me, but DATCAP was very heavily involved in designing those rules, because they oversee the administration of, the counties have to go and check to make sure that these conservation practices are being followed. So, and DATCAP oversees that county effort. So we knew it was coming, but that doesn't really matter so much, because one piece of software works the same for one person or 200 people, though 200 people are going to find more problems with it. But it really, it's not, more users doesn't hurt us at all, really. It's good. The exception is it's good to know, for us to be able to anticipate when we need more server space for the maps. An area of that's different is some of the uses of, like, DNR's use of the P-index or SnapPlus for water quality trading. They've had some conversations with us about what was going, particularly about the phosphorus index over many years, but they got to a point where they put it in the rules, and they started those rules down the rulemaking road, without really being able to tell them, that there's reasons why this is not the most appropriate use of that P-index, and we had to make some last minute accommodations because they'd already started down that road. That it would have been better if they come and talk to us earlier, and we could have made a different set of assumptions, even using the same models. We could use a different set of assumptions, because for nutrient management planning, we in the phosphorus index, and in where you calculate your soil loss, even you're looking to be sure that you're providing the conservation that field needs. So you're trying to err on the high side for the field. And if you want to credit phosphorus reductions, you don't want to start from a really high place. You want to start from a place where you're maybe even underestimating the phosphorus loss from a field, so that you make sure that if you're really giving some reduction.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that, as you say, 200 users are great and can use the same program, but their needs might, change how you set things up. Any
Definitely.
last questions? Otherwise, I think we can probably wrap up.
I have one more here. There was discussion at one time of NRCS moving away from Russell 2. Is that still in the works, or because I've been out of this for a while?
Oh, the question is NRCS going to keep on using Russell 2? Yes, for now. They were going to change to WEP, which is the Water Erosion Prediction Program. And they had several deadlines for that. And we had started to make the accommodations to put WEP in the program instead of Russell 2. And we'd actually started some research projects about integrating WEP into our P-index, and comparing WEP losses with edge of field losses from monitoring. And then they changed their mind and went back to Russell 2. So that's a long answer to yes, they're going to stay with Russell 2.
Okay.
Yeah, I think WEP is available now, but it's not going to be required in NRCS uses anyway.
Yes, they do have a web version, and I think that the NRCS's web version may be public now, but I'm not even sure that is true. They were working on it for a long time.
Yes. Okay, well, follow up with Laura or maybe with Hava if you have any more questions about this. Otherwise, thanks, Laura, for describing the interesting world of SnapPlus, making some of us jealous about the effective planning processes, nutrient management planning processes across the border.
Well, planning is one thing and implementation is another.
Fair enough.
It was really nice to be here.
Thanks. Come visit in person sometime.
Yeah, we'd love to have you, Laura.